Ladies and gentlemen, we'll call to order the regular board meeting of the SCV-GSA Board of Directors. Director Peterson, would you mind leading us in the pledge, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Greg. So announcements from the president today. This meeting is being conducted in person at the SCV Water Agency, e.g. Jerry Gladbach Water Treatment Plant Boardroom. As a convenience to the public, members of the public may also participate virtually by logging into the agency's Zoom meeting. Any member of the public may listen to the meeting or make comments to the board using the call-in number or Zoom webinar link. In the event there is a disruption of service, which prevents the agency from broadcasting the meeting to members of the public using either the call-in option or the internet-based service, this meeting will not be postponed or rescheduled, but will continue without remote participation. The remote participation option is being provided as a convenience to the public and is not required. Members of the public are welcome to attend the meeting in person. See, we have some public presence, so just a reminder to the public who are attending in person that there are public comment cards on the table outside. Please complete them and return them to the board secretary to help expedite public comments. The procedure for today will be as follows. I will introduce each of the agenda items. Staff will present, and at which I will ask for public comments and then ask for discussions and questions from the board. Once concluded, we will ask for a motion and a second. After any further discussion, the board secretary will call the roll for the votes. Okay. With that, we'll move on to item 1.3 for public comments. Do we have any, Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments or items not covered on the agenda today?
There is none at this time.
This time, very good. So with that, we'll move right on over to item 1.4, approval of the agenda. Board, do we have any changes, additions, or modifications to the agenda? No, okay. Seeing none, then the agenda is approved. Okay, with that, we'll move into 2.0, the consent calendar. Item 2.1, approval of the consent calendar. Madam Secretary, do we have any comments from the public?
There is none.
Okay, no comments from the public. Any comments or questions from the board today? No. Okay. Comments from the board. Then that I will ask for a motion on item 2.1.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Director Gutzeit, second by Director Martin. Board Secretary, could you please call the roll?
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Gutzeit,
Yes.
Director Hernandez,
Yes.
Director Marks,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Peterson,
I abstained since I was not at that meeting.
and President Gibbs.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 2.1 has passed.
Thank you, Board Secretary. With that, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which moves us into 3.1. This is the consideration to adopt the 2024 annual report for the Santa Clara River Valley East Groundwater Sub-Basin Groundwater Sustainability Plan. Okay, we have a presentation now. Mr. Vergoons, floor is yours. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. And let's just jump into it. It's nice to see you all. Okay, Uni, hold on. We've been down this road before. There's a little delay. There wasn't earlier today when we were testing it, but there seems to be now. Now, if it continues to skip forward, I'll back up. Okay, so jumping into it. So this is the 4th time we've talked to your board about adopting an annual report. And this is for water year 2024. The prior 3-year prior 3 years of reports were submitted to DWR. It was only last year that DWR commented on our 2023 report. And you can see the text on the slide there, but DWR did say that it satisfied the requirements and it was on track. So that's good. So we would expect something similar this round. Key findings. The basin was operated in a sustainable manner. We didn't have undesirable results. Those are the most critical topics that we look at with these reports. We did have a few exceedances of minimum thresholds, but there are explanations for those, and those don't rise to an undesirable result. Groundwater use was lower in 2024. It was actually lowest it's been since, well, in the 5-year period dating back to 2020. So we had lower groundwater extraction. We continued to have slightly higher than average rainfall in 2024. Imported water was a little bit higher last year. The report goes into other staff activities, and it also briefly describes that the 5-year update is in the works and some of the things that are expected with that, such as looking at sustainable management criteria across the board. Key changes in this report, we made section 2.4 a little clearer to focus strictly on description of the monitoring networks. Last year's report, we had a little bit of discussion about even data and results in those, but 2.4 has been made a little bit more efficient to just focus on the networks. And then 8.2 was revised to just drill into whether or not we are meeting our criteria and have had, and if we've had undesirable results. Sort of a clear section in the report that your board and DWR can go to quickly determine if we have any concerns in the basin. So I'll go through the 5 applicable sustainable management criteria in the basin. I won't spend a lot of time on it, and this reminds me that though our presentation isn't very lengthy, if your board does have detailed questions, John Porcello and Surfraz Alam are here from our team. So we've got plenty of horsepower here if your board wants to dig into any technical details in the actual report. First one, chronic lowering of groundwater levels. We're doing well there. There are 25 wells in the basin that are used for the GSP to monitor water levels, whether or not we're above or below water level thresholds. In 3 cases at the GDE wells, which is a known issue that we've talked about, we were above the minimum thresholds. That's expected, given the rainfall and the lower pumping. Moving on, chronic reduction in groundwater storage. Similarly, we're doing well there. Last year, we had above average rainfall, not as much as 2023, but we had 5.8 inches greater than the long-term average. Storage changes there primarily reflect precipitation. This next graphic goes into that a little bit. These large blue columns on the graph represent groundwater extraction. The colored sections that go from the bottom of the graph to the top of the graph, so on the right, the blue color, that indicates the year type. So 2023, 2024 was a wet year. The dashed magenta line represents the cumulative change in storage. So storage has been coming up, which is great. Precipitation has a large role in that. Moving on, a third criteria, which is not applicable, it's just included here for completeness. Seawater intrusions, not applicable in this basin. Moving on, for degraded groundwater quality and storage, we're doing well there, although we identified an unexpected issue this year with the GSP's sustainable management criteria to measure whether or not we've exceeded thresholds for undesirable results. Essentially, the GSP has two tests to determine if we've exceeded salts in the basin. Under the first test, in a known area of the basin with high salts, the test did indicate that we exceeded the minimum threshold for sulfate. We've seen this in the past. This is a known issue dating back to at least 2016. But the other point here is under test 1, we showed it was exceeded. Under test 2, we showed it was not exceeded. So we've got conflicting results. And in talking with John about it, we realized that this is something else that we would want to look at for the 5-year update to make this more clear. It's not good to have conflicting, the question is, do we need 2 tests? Probably not. But let me go on a little bit more. Essentially, under test 1, we had more than 20% of wells in one area exceeding the water quality objectives for sulfate. This is a known part of the basin where we have high TDS and sulfate. There's a purple circle on the map that indicates where that area is. Last year, or perhaps the year before, we showed a similar map. That time, the concentration of salts was higher, but it didn't exceed the test. So this is an area in the basin. It's a focused area. It was originally identified in 2016 during development of the Salt and Nutrient Management Plan. There was some anomalous data in that area. And between the team developing the Salt and Nutrient Management Plan and the regional board that was involved in it, there was a decision made to identify this area as somewhat anomalous and even subdivide it to reflect that there are higher salts there. We believe the increased salts are probably related to a natural condition. So yeah, we had an exceedance in the minimum threshold here, but there's really no undesirable result, and that's the bottom line. So this is something we'll clarify moving forward in the 5-year update. Moving on to the land subsidence criteria. No undesirable results here. We monitor land subsidence a couple different ways, and when I say we're monitoring for land subsidence to make sure it's not occurring. We don't have any evidence so far that it has occurred or that it is occurring. We're really looking at the land elevation in the basin. We see areas where the elevation goes up, other areas where it goes down. So this is something we need to monitor long-term. We have 2 satellite methods, the INSAR data, and I have a map on the next page. It's sort of a color flood map of the basin. And then we have a UNAVCO Sky B station. It's John, is it a GPS station in the basin? Yeah, it's a single location in the basin north of the San Gabriel Fault. We only have one of these special UNAVCO stations in the basin, and we use that as a check to corroborate other information. And then this year is the first year we got 2 periods of land survey monitoring in. So more work will be done in that. Moving into this particular map, the large color flood area represents the INSAR data. If you look over on the east, sort of northeast of the site, you'll see a green box. That's Sky B. That's the background location. South of that, you'll see the San Gabriel Fault in the Halser Faults. And then south of San Gabriel, you'll see a number of red stars. Those red stars are the new land surface elevation monitoring network that we've put in place. Your board may wonder logically why they seem to be grouped in that area. The reason they're grouped there is during GSP development, and even today, We anticipate water levels in this area will be lower in the future than they have been in the past when additional Saugus wells come online, such as V201 and V205. Those wells have been offline due to perchlorate. Treatment systems are being installed in those wells. But when we come out of all this data compilation, I think the key point for your board is in no case did we exceed the 0.1 foot exceedance in water year 2024. It's something we'll continue to monitor though, which is something we have to do with the GSP. Okay, moving on. Depletion of interconnected surface water. Forgive me, I know we've talked about this a lot, so I may sound like a broken record, but we've got some triggers and minimum thresholds at some of the GDE wells that are out of whack. It is a known issue, but we did have water levels in GDE B, C, and E go below the minimum threshold and trigger in water year 2024. Known issue, needs correction, kind of evidence identifying that the conditions are good there as we've done GDE habitat evaluations in these areas. There's no evidence at all of undesirable results. So this is something that needs to be corrected with the GSP 5-year update. We initially learned of this back in 2022. In 2023, we had an updated model. And at that time, we simulated what we think the new thresholds would look like. I'm going to show you a graph of that. Don't hold us to it because there are additional model refinements going on, but the direction is what I want to make sure it's clear with your board and stakeholders. Up on top, that yellowish line, we have the current GSP trigger and the current GSP minimum threshold. Those are the ones that are too high. With updates to the flow model, we are estimating that those are going to be quite a bit lower. You'll see at the bottom of the graph, we have tentative revised GSP triggers and minimum thresholds. So we anticipate that these will be going lower where they need to be consistent with the GSP. Exact values where these land will be determined with the GSP 5-year update process. But no undesirable results with these. So we're solid on that. Conclusions, our monitoring networks are in good order. First year of the semi-annual land elevation monitoring with the licensed survey team is complete. One wrinkle in our monitoring network is GDED, as in dog. That's a well that was washed out around 2023. That hasn't been a priority to replace for a couple reasons. One is we're still in a wet period. Basins operated sustainably in 2024. That's really the bottom line, and we haven't seen undesirable results. We've had a few exceedances of minimum thresholds that we've talked about today. The annual report goes into a number of other things that the GSP team is working on, including outreach to private well owners for non-de minimis and de minimis wells. And with the 5-year update coming, we're anticipating public workshops, revision of sustainable management criteria. We expect some potential changes to the monitoring networks. GDEA is one well that we believe is useful, but it may not represent a true GDE. So we may want to look at GDEA differently with the 5-year update. GDEB, which is the one near I-5, it's a good well, but its position may not be ideal for evaluating conditions in that area. But all in all, for a 2024 report, things are looking good. And we're We're happy to answer any questions that your board may have, and our recommendation is that you adopt the 2024 annual report. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Rick. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comment on this? I'll allow it. Sandra, come on up, please.
You always have this set for someone about 8 inches taller than me. I have a couple questions. They're just clarifying questions, nothing probably major. Why did we use more imported water in 2024 than in 2023 if we had such a high amount of rainfall? First question. You talked about the sulfates, the exceedance of sulfates, and it looks like you checked for human activity there. You said, no, it looks like it's natural. But why would that one spot have an exceedance of sulfates? And if it's natural, why wouldn't it be over a wider area? And it seems that sulfates are very common in, cleaning supplies and things like that. And so how do you monitor to make sure that it's not from human use or abuse? Not last. One other thing is the water board and this board have bantered around the removal of salts. And I'm wondering if you're still considering that, because we do have such hard water. Also, you looked at the current GSP triggers and lowering them. And to the lay person, it looks like if the triggers are here and this is where we are, the easy way is to say, oh, let's just put the triggers down below. So could you explain that again, why you made that decision, and is it really a safe decision? Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
I'm waiting for the response.
Okay. In terms of importing more water, we've had wells out of commission due to PFAS and other reasons, including 201, 205 with perchlorate. So we've imported more water to make up for that. The sulfate issue in that area of the basin, it's not just sulfate, but it's TDS also.
TDS.
Total dissolved solids in that area. John Porcello and I were talking this morning about drilling into that a little bit more, because it's a good question. One thing we'll likely do is, and this doesn't answer your question directly, but I want to tell you, we're going to look at putting some Piper trilinear diagrams or some stiff diagrams together to look at the chemical signature of that water to see if it might look like something else, or maybe it's influence from upwelling from the Saugus Formation. So it's broader than sulfate. Fortunately or not, it includes TDS as well. In terms of the GDE triggers, right now they're just set too high in some of these areas, and I respect what you're saying, but as they're set now, they are set at a location above the ground surface that would represent essentially flooding 15 feet higher than ground surface. So clearly those aren't reflective of a low groundwater condition.
Why would they have done that?
There are a couple reasons. It's a bust in the survey. The land survey was incorrect. That was the biggest thing that threw those numbers out of whack. So when we move forward with the 5-year update, we'll develop better graphics so stakeholders can understand why we think they need to go lower. But right now they're way too high, way too high. And forgive me, I think I might have forgot your fourth question.
The salts removal in general.
Yeah.
And the hardness, the water hardness.
Mr. Cole, can you speak to that a little bit?
Certainly. Thank you for the questions, Ms. Patel. There have been, periodic efforts in the basin exploring the removal of hardness from the drinking water supply specifically. The challenge that sometimes arises is that the standards are still set in a way that drinking water standards aren't exceeded. So the investment of treatment to remove, specifically hardness is one that's a difficult thing to pursue. I will say, as part of the sanitation district's recent treatment plant expansion, they're not dealing so much with hardness, but chloride removal. So that project is now up and running and performing as it was intended to do. So that's my response.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Sandra. Madam Secretary, is there any more public comment?
There's none online.
Very good. Okay. Directors, any questions? Director Martin.
Thank you, President Gibbs. Actually following up on one of Ms. Catel's comments, on the area that the sulfate, the TDS, so-called anomalous
Yes.
results answered. When you made your report, you said we will be looking into this. So you expanded a little more on your answer to Sandra, but that was going to be my question.
Okay.
What exactly are you going to be looking into, and what steps are you going to be taking?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Right now, we'll be looking at the water quality, the chemical signature, see where that leads us. After that, we would likely double check the construction of those wells that are put in that area to see if some of them might be screened into the upper part of the Saugus Formation. So those two components will help us understand more what's going on there.
Okay. Then one other little question along with that is, you made the statement that there are no undesirable effects. Is that because you don't consider that a result of pumping in that area?
Exactly.
If it's there, it's a naturally occurring situation.
That's correct.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Director. Director Peterson.
On the same lines, the sulfate area, where is that exactly? Your maps are great, but it's kind of a general location.
It is, let me flip back. Can you throw it up on the screen, Uni? Director Peterson, it's squarely in the Santa Clara River.
Mhm.
And you can see it's upstream of the South Fork and Bouquet Sand Canyon.
Okay,
So there's a narrowing of the river channel there.
so it's north of the sanitation plant there. Outlet,
It's, yeah,
north or east?
Northeast.
Thank you.
But more probably east than north.
All right, so it's upstream, basically.
Yeah.
That's a better way to say it, yeah.
All right. It's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Marks.
Rick, in your report, a reference was made to an updated Southern Nutrient Management Plan. Are we currently in the process of doing that, or was that completed last year?
We are in the process of doing a full update. Ernesto Velasquez and his team are,
That's what I thought.
and is that a couple years out, Steve?
Yeah, we're going to be substantially underway this year. There was kind of we'll call it a minor update before. But this is going to be a full update of that planning effort that will be coming up over this year and next.
Okay. So the reference in the report was to this kind of refresh of the existing one.
Yeah, and that was really designed to try and answer some of these questions, specifically in the groundwater sustainability planning effort. The salt and nutrient management planning effort kind of off cycle a little bit. And so this, smaller refresh was designed to try and answer some of these questions with the knowledge that we'll be doing a full update later.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Director. Director Hernandez.
Thank you. So I want to make sure while this slide is still up that I have a good understanding. So I appreciate the question that was answered, because I think what we're seeing here is, to your point, there was this groundwater extraction is not likely to increase in salts. And I think that's a really important point. I know we've talked about this quite a bit, and we talked about TDS and sulfate. So again, can you repeat what's the feeling that the extraction, it would not increase this issue?
Well, sure. We have higher salts this year by that first test, but yet groundwater extractions have been lower this year within the last 5 continuous years. So no, we don't believe groundwater extraction has anything to do with that. The 2 other points to make, it is a known issue, known local issue. And the why did it pop up in test 1 this year? One of the reasons it came up in test 1 is because there was another well added to the network. So we had that as part of the well set this round. So no, in terms of things that are a concern to the GSA, this water quality issue is interesting, but I don't believe it's caused by pumping. It looks like a natural phenomenon.
Thank you, Mr. Goods. I think that's a very important, I just want to make sure we all walk away with that clear understanding, that it just could be the local area and the local geology that we're with, but not in fact groundwater extraction. So I think that's important note for this group to make. And additionally, we did talk a little bit about, how we should address triggers and thresholds for GSP. Can you share with us, or remind me perhaps, what the recommendation for that process would be to get us there, in whatever timeframe we're seeking?
I can, and we have a graphic in the next slide that'll go into that a little bit, but we can just talk about it now. So for the 5-year update, we'll have a certain component of public involvement. We'll have a series of workshops, probably 4 of them. One would be, why are we doing this? The second would be, what constitutes undesirable results in the basin? And we'll have another stage or another period of workshops where we, in advance of the workshops, I'm getting ahead of myself, excuse me. So when we go to stakeholders and talk about what would constitute an undesirable result, in that effort, we'll get stakeholder input, and we'll talk in some more detail about some of these GDE areas and what low water levels would constitute an undesirable result. For example, we're imagining that we'll have graphics, cross sections, and we'll explain what low water levels would do to the habitat. Out of that workshop on what would constitute undesirable results, we'll have in mind a target groundwater elevation in these areas that we want to try and manage to. After that, we'll use the groundwater flow model and look at the approaches to pumping and see where the simulated groundwater levels are relative to where we think they need to be to avoid those undesirable results. So it'll be an iterative process with stakeholder involvement.
Thank you.
Mhm. You're welcome.
Just two quick questions. I think it might be the next slide. The units on the revised triggers. I always had trouble seeing the units where it's like 1,065 and it's changing to 1,035. I'm
Oh.
guessing that's feet above sea level, or it just seemed,
Let's get there on the slide, but
Yeah.
yes, those are feet on the
but
left-hand
then there were
side of the
some other
graphic.
units after it that I couldn't read.
Okay,
One with the triggers.
it's the latter part of the presentation, so keep advancing.
That
There we
one.
go.
So what does that say? It says feet NAV something. Oh,
Yeah, that's the elevation datum,
it-
NAVD 88.
but it's feet above sea level.
Yes,
Can we put that on there in at least, in the future?
sure.
Because I've seen, feet below ground surface
Hmm.
or feet above sea level, and it would explain with this threshold, we're looking at, probably in the workshops or things, you're probably going to talk about root depth and, impact on GDEs that has to do with how deep their roots go. I've heard that discussion. And I just think having the units be clear. Because if you say 1,065, 1,065 what? Feet? We're used to thinking elevation, I think. And this is elevation, but sometimes wells are depth is done below ground surface, which is
Right.
opposite.
Yeah, we can certainly make that more clear. And,
Just feet
Yeah.
feet above sea level would fix that
okay,
in future reports.
thank
And
you.
then second question. So we know some things are not quite right based on the first GSP. Is there anything that the agency would say, oh, you were so far off, you need to revise your GSP now? Would that ever happen? Or is it the expectation that we find some glitches and fix it with the 5-year update? Is that what they're expecting?
DWR is expecting we'll fix those with the 5-year update.
Okay.
And back in 2023, I believe we reached out. It was around 2023. We reached out to DWR and Director Gutzeit. We said, hey, we've identified, paraphrasing, of course,
Mhm.
we've identified this issue. We'd like to do a focused update on our GSP just to take care of this.
Mhm.
We know what it is, et cetera. And the Department of Water Resources says, nope. You need to wait until you get our letter on the full GSP and address it then.
Mhm. Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director. Rick, one question, and it's kind of hypothetical, and I'm not trying to open any big box here, but we keep talking about the groundwater levels and all of the wells and everything that impact, and we've been doing this for a number of years now. What becomes the real jurisdiction of the oversight if hypothetically a very large well showed up somewhere on the east side of town and started pulling water and starts affecting triggers down the line? Are we just required to adjust our triggers, or do we actually have oversight power or some sort of methodology to be involved with that process?
Well, Tom, I'm going to say one thing and then I'll turn it over to you because we get into
It's not a good sign when it goes right to the lawyer, but that's okay.
Well, not quite right. Come on. With our so two things. One, we have a current relationship with LA County. We would hope to be able, but we can't guarantee it, to stave off something like that before it went through and was approved by LA County. And there's different ways to slice and dice their well review process, whether they look at it as ministerial or as part of an EIR. But if we were not successful, President Gibbs, in a well like that went in, then and it affected our ability downstream to meet our sustainable management criteria, yeah, that would be a big deal.
The Groundwater Sustainability Agency does have the ability to limit extractions. So but it's not as simple as all that, you
Sure.
know, you have to do it in a fair manner that applies to everyone equally and so forth, but that power is there.
Very good. That was the only question I had. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, there's no other comments or questions for 3.1. I'll entertain a motion from the board.
I'll move approval of the
Director
report.
Marks, move the recommended action. Have a second? Director Markin with a second. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Goodside,
Yes.
Director Hernandez,
Yes.
Director Mark,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Peterson,
Yes.
and President Gibbs.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 3.1 has passed.
Great. Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that, we'll move to item 3.2, the quarterly status update of the groundwater sustainability plan implementation. Mr. Vergoots, we get you again.
Thank you, President Gibbs. All right. Let's jump into this one here. Uni, are you able to advance for me? Thanks. So we have a brief presentation here with a few updates. We'll talk about the ongoing GSP implementation, items up here on the screen, the outreach for wells, et cetera. And the upland GDE evaluation. We'll spend a little bit more time talking about the hydrogeologic conceptual model, and then we have a graphic describing some of the higher level approaches with the 5-year update. And then we'll go into a look ahead. Okay. So right now we're engaged in well owner outreach, both to de minimis wells or de minimis well owners and non-de minimis well owners. For de minimis, our outreach is limited primarily in the canyon areas. We're seeking volunteers for groundwater quality monitoring from private domestic wells. We did send 39 flyers. We've had limited success. 12 flyers were returned undeliverable. We asked in the flyer for people to get back to us by March 1st. So far, we haven't received any interest. So this is something that is, while I would like for it to be different, I'd like to have more volunteers. I think this is something that we recognize might be hard to advance for the GSA. For the non-de minimis wells, we have made contact with the non-de minimis well operators. Rick Vasilopoulos and Tara Bravo are working to get a meeting set up with them to go over the approach for metering and reporting extractions. The current target date for that is April. We are also working on a basin-wide review of well records. This is something that is funded by the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant. And we've decided to do this work in-house because it's more efficient for us. We have the skills. Sir Fraz is leading this up for us to look at the different databases on well records in the valley. Currently, Sir Fraz is putting together a decision tree, if you will, described here, the systematic flow chart to focus in on these wells, whether or not they're active or not. And for the upland GDE study, this is something I'd hoped to bring back to your board this month, but that was pushed, so that'll come back in June. But this is the study where we're looking at some of the distal parts of the basin and whether or not regional pumping would have an effect. So that'll come back to your board in June. In terms of updating the hydrogeologic conceptual model, this is something, Director Goodsite, that DWR said they did want us to do for the 5-year update. So we're working on geologic data review right now. We have a local firm that specializes in geology and wells, helping us get records organized so they can be input into the 3D model. And they will also work on an updated geologic description. And what I mean by that is a description that would be helpful for us as a GSA to communicate with the Department of Water Resources. That talks about the nature of the geologic deposits in the valley and whether or not they are prone regionally for subsidence. Geophysical field work was recently completed. Sir Froz managed that for us, did a terrific job. He was out there most of the 14 days. We had one rain day where they didn't work. Currently, the field work is complete. The post-processing is taking place. I wanted to acknowledge the help from the city and 5 Point for granting us access to move into those areas. And I should also acknowledge the California Department of Fish and Game. We talked with them just out of an abundance of caution to let them know what we would be doing. And we put together a short work plan that we thought would answer their questions, and it did. And so we were able to advance that work without getting more involved with CDFW. This graphic is not something that's easily readable, so we've included text here. Yeah. So the black lines are the existing geologic cross sections that are in the approved GSP. The gold colored lines are lines that we expect to add. These are cross sections developed primarily by Richard C. Slade and Associates over the years. We'll be increasing the number of sections, geologic sections. Those will go into the 3D model. Richard C. Slade's team is also going to look at the driller's logs or the electric logs that are used to make up these sections. There's a particular way we want these looked at. And I guess the gist is, in terms of geologic convention in the basin, south of the San Gabriel Fault, there are some specific aquifer units that can be traced for a little ways. They're important. They're important to where we screen wells, where we find contamination. So south of the San Gabriel Fault, we'll be looking to mirror those aquifer designations with more certainty than they've been done with some of the older ways of looking at geologic units. The groundwater sustainability plan uses more of a broad brush approach, in other words, with the geologic layering in the basin. We're going to be improving that south of the San Gabriel Fault and north. And not to nerd out on this too much, but because of fault offset, San Gabriel Fault, the Halser Fault, there's vertical offset, lateral offset. The geologic layers north of the fault probably won't exactly match those south of the fault. That's to be expected. But this will be the first time that we're digging into those details. All this is going to help us answer DWR's questions about the potential for subsidence, and it will also help us in terms of updating the groundwater flow model. So there's a lot of work in this. This will wrap up in June or the end of June. On to the geophysics. This is the area along the Santa Clara River where we did a geophysical survey. These blue lines are hard to see. This was a planning level. Let me just jump to the next map. The next map indicates the red lines where we actually did the survey, where we laid the resistivity lines up and down the river and across the river. We went as far north as McBean and as far south as the sanitation district plant at Valencia. To the west, you'll see a break in the section. The area there is so heavily vegetated, it was hard for the crew to keep a continuous line there. I think the best expression I heard was that it's an area like Jurassic Park. And it's just very hard to get in there and string lines continuously. But nevertheless, it's good information. The yellow line on that map is the Halser Fault. It's not as significant of a regional feature as the San Gabriel Fault, but it's important here. Older geologic studies indicate a vertical offset along the Halser Fault of about 1,000 feet, south side up. And so you can imagine that offsetting the aquifer units in the Saugus Formation relative to the north. So we're expecting that the geophysical survey line will help us identify the location of the Halser Fault. And then, of course, we had a number of cross sections across the river. The area around line 8, I believe, Sir Fraz, we weren't able to advance it as far as we wanted due to a lot of people living in the river area there, but we still got good information. Furthermore, and I don't have it as a slide here, but also with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant, we are planning to put a deep Saugus well north of that red line, north of the Halser Fault. That's targeted for construction within roughly the next 12 months. These are some pictures that Sir Fraz took when he was in the field, and Sir Fraz is here if your board has detailed questions, of course. The crew did a very good job. They worked pretty much continuous, day in, day out, weekends, etc. Each survey line in the section that goes across the river are 800 or 900 feet. They would pound metal stakes in the ground along the line every 10 feet, and then they would survey in the elevation of the line as well. This is the preliminary data from the survey. This section here is just along the river Thalweg, so the center of the river. And the area, the top graph, just checking my notes here. Yeah. So these are oriented with the left side of these images being east and the right side being west. So the top left box, if you will, is the easternmost section, and the bottom right is the westernmost section. So this is really interesting stuff. We don't want to get into what we think it means just yet until the post-processing is completed. But we did get good information on the thickness of alluvium and some other details about the Saugus. We think that some of the brighter colored images on here might be due to buried utilities or potentially footings for power lines. But again, we need to do the work. We need the geophysical consultant to complete this work before we really go in and talk about what we think it means. But so far, so good. In terms of next steps, and we talked about this a little bit, Director Hernandez. In terms of the GSA, we're planning to update the hydrogeologic conceptual model first and then move into workshops, talk about undesirable results, etc. We're also planning to have the groundwater flow model updated. Right now, the ModFlow USG flow model is what we've been using. It's a good model. It's a regional model. However, the water resilience team at SCV Water is working on a model that will be able to zoom into key areas such as along the rivers more closely. And we plan to utilize that flow model as part of the GSP development when we run the scenarios. And I don't want to overstress this, but we looked at moving forward with two models throughout the process, but we didn't want to come out on the end after the GSP was completed and switch to a different model and possibly have different criteria come out of it. So doing it this way by building our work on the efforts that the water resilience team is doing is smart. And so we have a graphic that describes this a little bit. The yellow boxes are GSA activities. Far left of the screen is January 2025. So we're a couple months in right now. So we're updating the hydrogeologic conceptual model. We'll be working after that's complete. We'll begin to develop materials to better do outreach with stakeholders regarding what would constitute undesirable results. The second row from the top talks about workshops. And this is draft. We showed January we would have the initial workshop on why we need to update the GSP. And then February, March, we would talk about undesirable results. And then moving into May, based on what we've learned to that date, we would utilize the flow model and begin to develop new water level thresholds for the basin. The latter part would be looking at groundwater quality management zones. That's another comment from the Department of Water Resources. They want us to talk more about how contamination is addressed in the basin. The blue lines are the things that the water resilience team is working on, and that magenta vertical column is their target to complete the model, the groundwater flow model. It may come a little bit sooner. Leading up to that, though, our team, including Sir Fraz and John, are expected to be working with them and overseeing what they're doing. So there's a lot of moving parts, as there always are with these kinds of things. And looking ahead, our next meeting with your board is June. That'll include budget adoption, the upland GDE item, and we'll know more about the improvements to the hydrogeologic conceptual model then too. For example, we'll have much better understanding about what these geophysical sections are telling us. And so that's it in a nutshell, and happy to answer any questions your board would have.
Great, thank you, Rick. Madam Secretary, do we have any speakers, public speakers?
There's none online.
Very good, thank you. Any questions from the board? Start this way. Director Marks.
Rick. I understand that DWR is expected to issue a updated document on GDE. So now that might be incorporated into the next set of GSP updates. If that comes out in a timely manner, so that's probably a big if. But if you have enough time, could you include an update of that document at our next meeting?
Of course. Of course. Yeah, we, in Director Marks, we reviewed an early draft of their multi-part document that they're working on, and provided a comment letter on it as well, but that's on our radar. So yes, update next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Goodside.
Yeah, I'll start with a related question to that. So it sounds like they're defining GDEs. Is that what you were talking about, Director Marks? Or more clearly defining GDEs? Because I question.
My understanding is that it'd be more of a process of how you incorporate GDE information into your document and to be the view of GWR staff on, you know, how those section, how that section of your updated GDE should address, of GSP should address
Okay,
GDP.
okay, good,
Mhm.
good. Yeah, because I had a little bit of a question about upland GDEs. Remind me where those are. Are those basically up canyon, like up San Francisco, up okay? Or what are we calling the upland GDEs?
Those are up, up in the canyons. The one that we added to the study this year is in Placerita Canyon.
Hmm.
It's up in the eastern part of the basin.
Mhm.
And then some of them aren't in canyons per se, down near, well, they're near canyons. A lot of canyons out
Canyon
here, right?
adjacent. Yes.
Out towards sort of the Towsley Canyon area. So they're in the distal parts of the basin.
Okay. No, that's interesting because I always wondered the elevation difference, and I know we're looking at the hydrology and how that's different. I always thought things basically drain down into the river. So if things are higher, how do we know they're GDEs? Would be just a very simple question. Like, is it a section of groundwater that just happens to be higher, maybe because of the faults or something like that? Or why would something markedly up in a canyon be affected by the main groundwater basin?
Right.
Because it's all draining down. Are we going to explain that?
We will.
Okay.
And the gist is that, for instance, in Placerita Canyon, Placerita Creek, up east of the Nature Center, there are, it's a different geologic terrain. There's hard rock, there's igneous rock up there. That area isn't likely to be connected to any kind of pumping that we're doing in the central part of the basin.
Right. That's the point I'm getting at.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right. But we need to put a bow on this. And so that's the intent to do that. And also for the areas, and I might not have the location exactly right, but southeast of Towsley, there's some outcrops of the Saugus Formation. These areas are, they rose to this concept during GSP development with stakeholder input that people wondered if pumping in the basin could affect them.
Right.
And so this analysis is designed to put that issue to rest.
Okay. And so, not to beat a dead horse, but I will. Or you'll have to tell Mr. Cooper that I failed massively.
He's like,
Yeah, okay. So GDE, I'm thinking GDE means we know it's connected to groundwater, but these may be ruled out as not GDEs or not GDEs that the GSP is going to track. We're calling them GDEs, but we're saying they may not be.
Yeah,
groundwater
right now
dependent.
they're considered potential upland GDEs.
Okay.
Whether or not they're a GDE at some sort of micro scale, I mean, we can talk about that, but really my focus is whether or not they're affected by things that are being done regionally in the basin. So,
Okay. Yeah, I see that. So then if it's not affected by pumping, then they'll just kind of be set aside as couldn't be affected by pumping because of where they are.
thank you. That's the way I see it too.
Okay.
It's not something that the GSA would include for ongoing monitoring.
Yeah. I guess my wish would be to say that clearly that they're not affected by groundwater pumping. Like they're not GDEs. But we'll see how that language can be, we talked about that with the Oak surveys. Like we're studying stuff that's not related to ground or likely not related to groundwater. And once we know it's not related to groundwater, I'd just like to say, we know this isn't related to groundwater, or at least maybe I'm saying it incorrectly, but the aquifers that we're concerned about. So we're going to set them aside and not talk about them again, as opposed to calling things GDEs that are not dependent on groundwater, like oak trees on top of, at 3,000 feet elevation on a hill that's not near the aquifer. But anyways, I'll move on. De minimis water quality monitoring. If nobody responds, is that a problem? Like, is it mandatory?
If nobody responds, it's something we'll have to see if we can find a workaround to.
Mhm.
So that could mean investing in GSA wells in some of the areas.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that's a potential next step.
Mhm. Yeah, and see, kind of on a related note to the GDE issue, if they're up canyon, other than potential contamination issues, I wouldn't think they would have a significant impact. The water quality, but any pumping they're doing is not really going to affect us at a de minimis level. So could we put a bow on some of that too, if it comes to that, if nobody responds, rather than try to evaluate if it's worth the cost and the data when we can conclude that they're likely not going to have an effect because of X, Y, or Z. I feel like we keep expanding the scope and checking things that probably could be ruled out or
Yeah, and
ruled unnecessary.
well, your point is good. I think we need to, and we're doing this, we're
Mhm.
making a good faith effort.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of these de minimis wells was really just for water quality data gaps.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm open to other ideas if it looks like maybe we have other information now and those aren't necessary. We'll have to evaluate that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we're expanding the scope. I think this is just kind of a muddy issue to work through because it takes some time. If we determine that there was another way to get that information, we'd want to do that.
Yeah, or I guess I go back to, this is a large agency. We spend a lot of money on this.
Yeah.
You have a little dink agency and no offense to Copperopolis, I used to do bike races up there, but Central Valley, these little small agencies, they're not checking up, they're going to say, we don't think this can influence us because the flow is this, the elevation is that, 90% of our flows go in this other way, so we're not even going to look at that. And one would hope that DWR would say, okay, makes sense, you don't have to do that. Just say it's good enough and move on. I just feel like we keep spending a lot of money and doing a lot of projects that we probably already know the answer to and might not have to do. And I'd like to see if we can be more efficient with our investigation. Couple more. The Saugus with the sulfate issue. I know the Saugus was known for TDS. I remember that part. I don't remember sulfate. Is the Saugus known for sulfate too? Okay. That's why it could be. That's why you keep saying it could be.
Depending where you're at in the Saugus, so
Okay.
I'll make that.
Okay, but in that area
clarification.
of the Saugus, we think that's why you're leaning towards potentially Saugus influence.
There are certain layers in the Saugus that exhibit high levels of sulfate. That's
Okay.
how I'd say that.
Thank you. Resistivity. What is the mechanism for getting data 150 to 200 feet below ground surface from an electrode that's 10 inches deep? I'm just curious. What are you doing? Is it like, I'm just thinking of like radar, but those cross sections that showed a depth of 150 to 200 feet down. And how is the like what's happening below that electrode to get data 200 feet deep?
Well, we introduced an electrical current into
Mhm.
the ground through
Mhm.
those electrodes and measure the response. Sir Frost could tell us more.
Yeah, it's like, is there anything 200 feet down that you're connecting to, or how does that happen? I'm just curious. In really simple, like, a paragraph or less,
Sure.
layman's terms.
So it's basically think like you have like two electrodes there,
Mhm.
and it transfers electricity, and it other one receives it.
Uh-huh.
And the farther there, the deeper the electricity goes, and other receives. So what it does is like, so 800 feet, every 10 feet they have a probe, and they basically do a different combination of like receiving from different combination of depths.
Mhm.
So like that, they start collecting data at different depths. So basically you can think like a loop kind of thing.
Mm.
The electricity goes here, goes like this, and received here.
Mhm.
It collects the resistivity everywhere here.
Mm.
And all different combination leads to like around 150 feet deep.
That's
data.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And resistivity is basically a proxy of soil texture. The higher
Yeah.
resistivity is like sandy, the lower is clay.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. It's just amazing that it can do that. Okay. And lastly, say again on the models, you talked about the water resiliency initiative. I know we have our big hydrogeologic conceptual model that we've always talked about. Is it a whole nother model, or is it something else that the water resiliency initiative is doing?
It's an updated model.
Okay.
They're not starting from scratch,
Okay.
but we will update the model operating system, which is not a big deal,
Mhm.
to a newer version of ModFlow that has better support.
Mhm.
And we expect to update model layering, the geologic units,
Mhm.
but we're not starting from scratch. I hope that helps.
Well, so is there two models or one model that's being updated?
Well, right now we have two models, and we have a model under development that
Mhm.
is building upon the older model.
And we'll end up with one that we like best ideally, or what is the goal?
That's the plan, is when we come out at the end, we have one model that's used for the GSA and used for the Water Resilience Initiative.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, I think if you could show your bar chart, because because I think that's a very good question. I think it'd be helpful if we could see it visually so that everybody understands, because you show the different models, right? And then you
Mhm.
show a point where possible convergence can take place. And I noticed it because there's a very tight window of when that could happen. Yeah. So maybe it might help if we look at that one.
Sure. Yeah, keep advancing, Uni.
There we go.
Yeah, that's right, Director Hernandez. There will be you call it a handoff, where that purple column is, where we're using the same model, both teams moving forward.
Thank you.
Director Martin.
Back to the upland GDE issue. And I do appreciate Director Gutside's very careful line of questioning on that, because this came up before. And my question at that time, I think it was during the drought period, and there was some stress plants that were above the effective groundwater pumping. And I think I mentioned then that if this is not required by Sigma, and that would be one of my questions, is it required by Sigma to look at upland GDEs?
It's No, I don't think that specific line item is in Sigma.
Okay.
But it is something that we put in our GSP.
Okay, so simply because it was brought up by a stakeholder meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so, I think I indicated at that time, I didn't want to be spending money on something that wasn't required by Sigma. And I think Director Gusai's line of questioning pretty much led to the point where it's not impacted by groundwater pumping. And why then would we be spending our money on things like that? Continue to do it again. Examine other areas of upland GDE when it's not required by Sigma, and we don't have any real funding for this, the work that this group does, other than out of ratepayer revenue.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you articulated it correctly, Director Martin. So the way I look at it is we went through, a very robust process when we formed the GSA and ultimately, had the stakeholder group that provided input into the different items that we were considering in the groundwater sustainability planning effort. So during that time, there was some stakeholder input that was received to evaluate those areas for potential impact or just understanding them better as far as how they're impacted by different hydrological cycles. So I think it's important that as Mr. Vergoot said, this is something we need to wrap up. And I think we're hearing that from the board as well. So I think we have the information in a way that we've done the analysis. And so we can bring that to the board and we can receive direction on how the board feels about, do we want to keep doing that in the future? Do we have enough information that we're comfortable making the conclusions that we're making? So I think it's coming. I think, and I hear at least two members that are providing direction to make sure that we provide that information and then provide some direction about how to move forward.
So you say we are about to wrap it up.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not going to look at any other area but this relatively new area that we're adding to the previous work that we did.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I don't think we're adding.
No,
anything.
we're not.
Yeah.
We're not
So
adding.
did we look at this area of upland GDE before?
We, yeah, the areas around Towsley we looked at once before. The intent then was to also look at Placerita Canyon, but we couldn't get in there. We couldn't get access at the time. And so we did that this year.
And as I recall, the stress that was observed was due to seasonal condition during drought period, not due to groundwater pumping.
Right. And I think we have the information now to make that a definitive statement. So I think that's where we're headed with it is making sure that we, did what we committed to as a sustainability agency and then try and wrap it up in a way that provides value for the information that was received and hear from the board about how and if they want that work to continue.
Okay, so I'll just close by saying, I don't think we should be spending money on projects and work that's not required by Sigma.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Peterson.
Oh, just a quick question, since I haven't been looking at the GSP lately. What is a de minimis definition of a pumper?
It's a well owner that uses less than 2 acre-feet of water per year for domestic purposes.
Okay,
Is that right?
Yeah.
that's right. All right, thank you. That's all.
I'm not sure about the purpose, but the 2 feet.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Director. Okay, seeing no other comments, this was just an information item, so there's no vote here or action. So we'll move to item number 4, Executive Director's Report. Rick, you get to sit this one out. Mr. Cole, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, President Gibbs. Just had a couple items that I thought the board would be interested in hearing. The first one has to do with kind of our downstream partners with the Fillmore-Piru Basin. We just heard last week that they have received approval of their groundwater sustainability plan. So that I think is a good sign for all as our basins connect with one another as the river flows downstream. We're still in a process of understanding what types of corrective actions that are going to be required of their plan. So we'll have more information on that, but it is a next good step, I think, for the basins as a whole. So I wanted to let you know that. One other kind of Sigma adjacent issue that SCV water staff have been weighing in on are the groundwater basins in the Kern area. I don't know how many of you have been able to track that, but they have been going through probationary hearings for the Kern basins. The reasons why it's important to the valley here is that we have groundwater banking activities that the SCV Water has invested in. So we're monitoring that process, and the Director of Water Resources for SCV Water was able to testify at the state board just more about the importance of groundwater banking and what it plays for the state's overall water resource strategy. So it's been an interesting thing to watch evolve. I think many of you will know that Sigma got its roots in the Central Valley. That's where subsidence has been and is a problem. And so it is being taken very seriously in that area. The state board gave another 6 months of extension of time for the Kern area to work on their groundwater sustainability plans to address the comments that they've received. So just wanted to have you all aware of that. It's something that we're engaging in as SCV Water because of the investments that have been made on behalf of our community here.
May I jump in and add something to that? There are, I believe, 23 groundwater sustainability agencies in the Kern subbasin. And in their drafts to DWR, they adopted not quite 23 plans, but most of them filed their own individual plan. They have now coordinated all 23. They all signed off on a single plan, which I think by itself is just an amazing feat. The state board recognizes that. That was a major ground. Well, that was DWR's big problem with it wasn't coordinated. They weren't using the same standards. They weren't using anything. But it's all coordinated now. There's still some concerns that the state board has. It's still, they're going to meet, once or twice a week to get this done. So there's still work to do, but that's pretty impressive.
And that completes my report. I'll just say I want to thank Mr. Vergoots and the staff and the consultants that have all been working hard to continue to advance and refine the planning efforts here. I think it continually improves, and excited to keep building off of the foundation that's been laid here. So thank you.
Good. Thank you, Steve. Madam Secretary, any comments from the public?
There's none online.
Well, all right, Sandra, we'll allow it. Go ahead, ma'am.
I will call you President Gibbs because we're in a public meeting. Thank you very much. Just wanted to mention that Mr. Cole mentioned the stakeholders advisory that we had, and I was on that. And I remember we had different size well pumpers. And each one of them was very quick to say, hell no, I really don't want to tell you what I'm doing because you're going to tax me. You're going to take my water. You're going to charge me for the water. So of course nobody's going to want to respond to you. I don't blame them. The other thing is I have mentioned publicly, probably at least 3 or 4 times that I have a well. It's not in use. But today you mentioned you sent letters out to people who had wells, whether they were in use or not. I never got a well, email or anything about it. There are a lot of people with wells, and whether they're working or not, I could tell you why people don't use them. Not here, not now, but I think that's really important that we know that, where the wells are, whether they're being used, and if there's any contamination nearby. I think that is something that hasn't been done by the GSA. The other thing I think the GSA should focus on, you mentioned in your study that you couldn't study a certain area right next to the sanitation district outfall in Valencia because of the Orendo. If you want to save water for groundwater sustainability, let's get rid of the Orendo and let's start at the Valencia outfall because it is a forest.
Thank you, Ms. Patel. Okay, that completes item number 4. Item number 5, any requests for future agenda items? I know Director Marks mentioned the DWR documents for comments on if we can at the next meeting. Are there any other future agenda items from the board? No. Okay. Hearing none, with that, we will adjourn until our next meeting on June 2nd. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.